And we're back. Wait for a handful of people to jump on. Okay. So in the first one, where we left off is that Toby is at the hospital and he is sitting there. He finally got a chance to meet with Anna's doctor. The doctor told him that he's going to need to fill out some paperwork, and he's standing at a window wall into the night. The whole room, this wall is full of windows, and he's looking out into the darkness. So he sees more of his own reflection, and where we left off is that he feels like he's a little bit stronger than he was earlier. So, but that's where we left off. Chapter 2, You Have to Fight. I turned away from the window and sat on the edge of my corner seat. I leaned against the back and crossed my legs with my hands folded across my stomach. My mind raced, but I tried to focus on the one thing I could do in that moment. I had a task, a responsibility. There was finally something that I could do. I heard the doors open and a nurse walked in with a clipboard. There was a form for medical history, several consent forms, and the one I didn't know how to answer, a DNR form. Do not resuscitate. Well, how can I answer that? We've never discussed anything like this. In the event of an organ failure, does she want life-saving procedures to be performed, or is it her wish just to let her go? Forget that. Bring her back, I said under my breath as I flipped to the next form. Excuse me, sir? The nurse said aloud. I hadn't realized she was waiting for me. Sorry, ma'am, I just don't have an answer to this, and without that knowledge, I have to give her the opportunity to make that decision herself by not completing it. I looked up at her for approval, but she had no reaction. Can I think about this for a little while? I asked. I'm sorry, sir, but I really need... Sir, you can complete the rest of the paperwork first while you think about it, but I really need that completed right away. Why, did something happen? I inquired. No, sir. It's just that with a head injury, things could change in an instant. I looked down at the pamphlet provided with the DNR order so I could determine if I should fill it out or not. It listed reasons that someone would choose to complete it, just as there were reasons listed that someone would not. I saw phrases like quality of life, aggressive interventions, and natural peaceful death. So what would she want? If there's no chance for a quality of life, why hang on? Who determines what quality of life she'll have? They'll still try something, according to the pamphlet, just not for a long time. There are risks of broken ribs and punctured organs. Is that what they mean by aggressive measures? All of those thoughts ran through my mind over and over. I kept telling myself that if her heart stops, they'll still try to bring her back, but not for an extended amount of time. I completed the form last and turned the clipboard back to the nurse. She tucked it under her arm and walked out through the glass doors as though she was in a relay race with someone waiting down the hallway for their turn to carry it on. What have I done? It was 11:52 p.m. according to my phone, more than an hour and a half before I could see Anna, and I was feeling overwhelmed again. I had felt like this before in my life, and I knew exactly what I had to do. I needed a way to turn the emotions into facts by keeping a journal of events. That way, all of the information I gathered was on my computer and not just in my head. I looked around the room again, but my thoughts extended beyond the walls. Where was I? Where exactly was the parking lot? Where was my truck? I didn't have the luxury of taking a lot of time to make a decision. Every minute counted. Every second counted. I got my bearings, glanced at the clock one more time, and briskly walked out the glass doors, down each corridor and out of the emergency room doors. As soon as I passed through the second set of double doors, I broke out into a sprint until I reached my truck. Just as I raced to get to the hospital, I raced to get home to gather a few things. The intersection at 82nd and Sargent was clear except the broken guardrail where Anna's car had crashed just a couple of hours before. The black tire marks were glossed over by a sheen of the wet road. As I got close to the house, I pushed the button on the rearview mirror to open the garage door. I was still out of range, but never took my finger off that button until I saw the light break through the bottom of the door when it began to lift. When I parked, I ran into the house, grabbed my iPad, laptop, wireless headset, chargers to go with all of them, and placed them all in a little black backpack. I passed the fridge, grabbed a couple of Diet Mountain Dew cans, added them to the pack, and started back towards the garage when a flickering light in the living room caught my eye. I slowly walked into the room to see a single candle by the front door still lit, the flame barely catching adrift in the air, directing shadows like a conductor swaying to a masterpiece. I walked towards the candle with one strap of the backpack over my left shoulder and stared at it for a moment, then scanned the entire room. The once romantic setting looked dark. The fireplace was cold, and a tray of food with a fondue pot was still staged on the coffee table. My imagination began again. The candles in the fireplace slowly began to relight themselves. I saw the ghost of myself enter the living room from the small hallway leading from the bedroom, looking around with a smile. He crouched on the floor between the couch and the coffee table in his black silk boxers. The door opened behind me and Anna walked through. She closed the door, unzipped her coat, turned around, and covered her mouth with a gasp. She was so beautiful in her tall black boots, black leggings, and cream-colored sweater. She removed the scarf from around her neck and hung it over her coat. Oh my God, baby, it's perfect. My ghost smiled bigger and stood up to embrace her. I walked around them to see her face. As I circled around them a second time, blood started to flow from the left side of her head. There were cuts up her arm. I closed my eyes tightly and denied my imagination to think like that any longer. I stared once again at the cold, dark room. I turned to blow out the candle and walked towards the garage again, threw my backpack on the passenger seat, started the truck, and backed out of the driveway again. I shifted to drive and looked at the clock, 12:19 a.m. I got back to the waiting room with 47 minutes to spare. I pulled a drink and my laptop out of the backpack, turned the computer on, and waited for it to boot. I entered my password, opened a new document, and began to write. When I finished capturing the events of the evening, I closed my laptop and looked around the room. There was a small monitor by the corner of the ceiling that wasn't on before, with a bar across the top displaying the word visitation. Underneath the bar was a single line, A. Miller. What does that mean? The glass doors opened, and her doctor greeted me with a smile. Mr. Mill. And he stopped himself and smiled. Sorry about that. Toby. What do you say, Doc? I said confidently as I stood and shook his hand. You can see her now, he said with a smile. He pointed to the monitor and continued, in the future, when we're ready for you, her name will display up there, just like it's showing now. When is the next time I'll get to see her then? 3:30 or 3:45, since I'm taking up 15 minutes now, I asked. It will always be on the half hour. He started walking away, and I followed. Toby, this is sometimes pretty tough to see. Anna is sedated, and there are a lot of machines. She's intubated, and I have her connected to a cranial monitor that's on the front left side of her head. Is she stable? I didn't even know what I was asking. It's just something I'd heard people ask on TV, and it sounded like it was a good thing. He stopped, turned to me, and said, she's in neuro-intensive care for a reason. There's nothing stable about her condition right now. That's why we're monitoring everything. I stared at him, stone-faced. He continued with, I'll explain everything when we get there. We turned a corner to the left, and when we reached the third room on the right, he pushed the curtain away and walked through. I followed him in, pushed the curtain away myself. Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. My eyes welled up with tears. My lip curled, barely a moment before the sobs began. I tried to speak, but all at once, all that came out was a high-pitched whimper. Anna. Oh, God, Anna. Her eyes were blackened and swollen shut. There was a thin rod piercing into her head on the front left side, and there was a temporary cast on her left arm. Her mouth gaped open around the intubation tube. The sounds. Oh, God, the sounds. With a click, a gush of air, and another click, I watched her chest rise. Click, whoosh, click, and it fell again. Beep, 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 beep. The heart monitor and brave wave monitor sounded off at different tempos. I walked closer to the bed with Anna on my right and placed my hand on her leg just as I heard a gentle, low roar of a motor like an automated air mattress. Something on her leg was expanding. I removed my hand and looked at a doctor who was stood in the corner watching me respectfully. They're sequential compression devices. They help with blood flow to the legs. We just call them leg wraps. I turned back to Anna, staring at her eyes like some gruesome movie that I just couldn't look away from. What happened to her eyes? I asked as I began to gain control of my sobbing. The impact of the accident caused her brain to hit against the inside of her skull. It's common with injuries like this. I placed my palm ever so gently on the left side of her face, and I felt a hand on my back between my shoulder blades. Are you okay? Doc asked. Without turning away from her, I whispered, I don't know what I expected, but I certainly didn't expect this. Doc reached over and pointed to the thin rod coming out of her head. This, he said, is the cranial monitor. It measures the amount of pressure on her skull. These, he continued, and he pointed to several things connected to her head, monitor her brain activity that I can see on this screen here. I turned to look at the screen. We're also monitoring her blood pressure, her heart rate, her oxygen level. Stop, I whispered. What are we looking at here, Doc? How bad is she? Toby, she's really bad. I'm showing you these things so you know that we are alerted instantly if there are any changes at all. He paused. I can't imagine how hard it is to only see her for 15 minutes every 2 hours, but please understand, she needs to rest. It's the only hope for healing the brain. Can I have a minute, please? He thought about it for a moment and said, I'll be right out here. He pulled the curtain shut behind him. I took Anna's hand into mine. I looked at her, then looked at the machines, and back at her again, as I conjured the best smile that I could. Hi, sweetheart. It's me. You got into a hell of a mess, didn't you? I'll be okay, baby. It will be okay. Just promise me that you'll fight. This might be the hardest thing that you've ever done, but you must fight this, sweetheart. I pulled her hand up to my lips and kissed the back of her hand. We have so much left to do. We have to quit our jobs and work at the sock store in the mountains, remember? We have to go on the Alaskan cruise to see the whales. We need to photograph the waterfalls of Iceland, and I swallowed hard. You need to take me to the Pacific Northwest to see Mount Rainier and Mount Hood, Mount St. Helens and Multnomah Falls. Baby, we need to spend the night at the old sanitarium in Louisville, and I need to take you to the Stanley Hotel in Colorado. Though tears continued to fall, I began to laugh lightly. Not that I'll ever sleep again when we go to those places. Remember when I saw the apparition running across the peach orchard at Gettysburg? I was so scared. We had to get you a new crystal, remember? Before we went to any more haunted places. Mary at the Cashtown Inn took yours. We have the dowsing rods in the spirit box still. We can take those to the sanitarium when we go since we've had good luck with them. I wiped silent tears from my eyes, then rubbed my fingers gently through her hair and that laid on her chest. Baby, it's almost time for me to go, but I won't be far. I'll just be out in the waiting room. Okay, baby? I'll see you in 2 hours. I love you, sweetheart. I love you so much. I kissed her hand with each statement. I'll see you soon, baby. You keep fighting, okay? You keep fighting, sweetheart. You have to fight. Doc came in and I stepped around the curtain out of her room. Can you find a way back? He asked. Still looking at Anna, I leaned with the curtains as he closed them to see her for as long as possible. What? I said, since I didn't hear a word he said, but knew he had spoken. Can you find your way back to the waiting room? No, I really don't think I have any idea how we got here. He said something into his communication radio that I didn't really hear, but I think he called for someone to sit with Anna. We walked down the hallway through a set of double doors, and the waiting room was immediately on the right side. Wow, felt like a lot longer going the other way, I said. Doc, how do I get back in when her name shows up on the monitor again? There's a keypad on the wall. The 5-digit code is 21244. Please don't come back until you're called. I understand, I told him, as I walked through the glass doors into the waiting room and sat in my corner seat. I leaned back in my chair with visions of Anna burned into my mind. I pulled out my laptop and updated the journal, yawning with every bullet point that I typed. When I was finished, I closed my laptop and tucked it away into the backpack. My drink was still on the table next to my chair. I leaned back again, folded my hands across my stomach, and closed my eyes. Chapter 3. A few more are joining. I know some of you are joining and dropping off, but this will all be on a recording later on. Okay, so let's get into Chapter 3. For those of you just joining, I'm just doing the first 4 chapters, along with the prologue, which is already out there. So some of you may have already read it. Chapter 3, Alone. Mr. Miller? Mr. Miller. I felt someone shaking my arm. Tobias Miller. I snapped out of my sleep and instantly looked at the monitor. Her name was not showing. It was 6:15. I snapped. Why didn't someone come and get me for my visitation? Mr. Miller, you need to come with me, said the nurse that I hadn't seen before. She was a short girl with pale skin and short auburn hair. I grabbed my backpack and followed her. We walked out of the doors and I turned left to go through the doors into the ICU, but the nurse turned in the opposite direction. Where are we going? I asked. She opened the door on the left side to a small room and stood to the side to let me in, then closed the door behind her. She spoke softly. Mr. Miller, my name is Amy, and I've been taking care of your wife tonight. I need to let you know that we've brought her out of sedation. Oh, thank God, that's great news. Mr. Miller, she's no longer intubated. We're giving her a generous dose of morphine for comfort. Her expression didn't match the amazing news that she was telling me. I don't understand. You don't seem happy about it. Please have a seat. I did as she said, and she began. Toby, a couple of hours ago, Annalise began showing signs of an uncle type of brain herniation. What the hell does that mean? There's an excessive swelling in the innermost part of her brain caused by the hematoma. I'm sure I gave her a look that matched my comprehension of her words when I said, "You're not helping." Mr. Miller, when she was brought in, there was blood pooling between her brain and her skull. The pooling caused pressure on the central part of her brain. When that happens, there's significant damage to the brain tissue deep on the inside. So do the surgery where part of her skull is removed, man. I mean, release the pressure, right? Sir, that's only an option if the herniation is near the skull. What are you saying? With the combination of the herniation visible by what we call abnormal posturing. She took a deep breath. So then why was she taken off of all the machines? Because machines are futile at this point. We want to give her the opportunity we want to give you the opportunity to see her before she goes without all the machines. Goes? I stared at her, hoping she would tell me that Anna was about to be transferred somewhere, maybe to another wing of the hospital, but I knew in my gut that's not what she meant. I shook and yelled, "No! Oh God, please no!" She gave me time to get my composure, and I finally spoke. How much time do I have? Hours at most. I tried so hard to get control of my emotions, knowing I couldn't go back and see her like that, but my emotions controlled me for the next 10 minutes. Hours, I thought to myself, and began to take deep breaths and through my nose and exhaled slowly out of my mouth until my shoulders stopped shaking and my breathing regulated. I think I'm ready, I told Amy. Mr. Miller, let me explain posturing before we go back there. Abnormal posturing is an involuntary muscle reaction that makes the patient flex her arms and legs. In her case, the head is stretched back, looking upwards, and her arms are extended by her sides with her wrists bent and her hands are pointing down. Her legs are extended and her feet are pointing towards the curtain. Oh my God, is she in pain? No, she's still in a coma. The morphine is helping her, is keeping her very comfortable. The posturing will sometimes come and go, and without sedation, she may wake up slightly, but it's likely she wouldn't be able to speak. I understand, I said. Sir, one more thing. Even if she does start to wake and by some miracle is able to speak, she may not know who you are. I could hardly comprehend the severity of what I had just heard. How can this be? That's the only thought that I had, and it repeated over and over like an unsynchronized chanting mob. Where was the confidence now? Where was that strength? I took several deep breaths and tried my best to put on a facade that I promised myself the night before. I looked up at her sympathetic eyes, swallowed hard, and said with a manufactured smile, "That's okay, Amy." I reached my hand up to meet hers. I still know who she is. She placed her hand on the outside of my arm when I stood up to make sure that I kept my balance. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Miller. This is not how I saw this playing out." I shook my head with a sarcastic laugh and replied, "Yeah, me neither." We walked out of the small room and turned right, past the waiting room, and she entered a code on the panel to the doors to the ICU. When we reached her room, the curtain was already pulled open. My overwhelming thought was how good it was to see her without that tube coming out of her mouth. The left side of her head was wrapped in gauze, her lips were dry. As Amy described, her head was pointing upwards and her arms and legs were stretched as far as her bones would allow. Her hands were pointing downwards and her feet pointed towards the curtain. I glanced up at the brain activity monitor. The progressive wavy line that I saw a few hours before was barely moving, like a peaceful lake on a breezy day. Even with her blackened eyes, gauze around her head, and cast on her left arm and her outstretched arms and legs, she somehow looked peaceful. I couldn't help but to think of the inevitable moment that I was facing within the next few hours. I turned to Amy, who was still standing at the entrance to the room. "Amy, what can I expect when it's time?" "Her brain will stop functioning, which will cause all of her organs to shut down and her body will relax." "Then what?" I asked. "Nothing," she told me softly. "Because of the DNR order, there's nothing more we can do." "What have I done?" I said, staring at her, hoping for some type of affirmation. Amy stepped closer to me and said, "You've done the right thing. That's what you've done. Without that order, we would have to keep her intubated and add more machines. When the brain dies, we can keep the heart pumping. We can keep the lungs breathing. When we turn to life-saving techniques like that, Toby, technically she's alive, but the brain is still dead." I sighed and turned back to Anna. Amy closed the curtain part way. "I'll leave you alone," she said, then closed it entirely. Alone. The only thing in life that I'm afraid of is being alone. Alone with my thoughts, alone with my hobbies, no one to share my day with, my good times and bad. How insignificant a life can be when you're alone. I walked next to her bed and took her hand with glassy eyes. Her body relaxed. The black began to fade from her eyes and the gauze slowly disappeared. The cast fell away. Her eyes opened and she turned to me with the most beautiful blue eyes I had ever seen. She was radiant. A smile stretched across her lips. "Baby, why are you sad?" she said. "Oh, sweetheart, they tell me that," and I looked away. "It doesn't matter, Toby. Nothing they say matters. Nothing that happens to me matters. What matters, honey, is that I know you love me. I felt it every day since the day we met, and that's enough for me. I love you too, Annalise, so, so much." She shook my hand back and forth and whispered, "Hey." I looked into her eyes again. "Till death do us part, remember?" she said. "I know, baby, I thought we had more time. I'm sorry for all the trivial bull. I'm sorry I worked overtime instead of spending time with you. I'm sorry I ever disrespected you in any way, and I'm sorry I spent so much time on my damn computer playing the drums or playing games. I'm sorry, Toby." I stopped talking to look at her. I'm not sorry for any of it. You lived your life, and that's the way it's supposed to be," she said. "But, honey, shut up," she laughed and pulled my hand to her lips. "There's not much time, and I don't want what's left to be filled with regrets. I have no regrets. I love you so much." I smiled at her. "I love you too, Anna." You have to promise me a few things, she began. First of all, keep living your life. You must live while you're still alive. Follow your dreams. Get that forever house in the mountains. Follow your passion of landscape photography. Keep writing. Go on an Alaskan cruise. Shoot waterfalls in Iceland. You do these things and I will always be with you. Baby, you have to promise me something else too. Anything, honey. Anything at all. I do want you to keep chasing ghosts, but please, don't look for me. I'm afraid it will only hurt both of us that much more. You have a gift. I need all those equipment and you can just see them sometimes. I never understood that, she said with a laugh. Keep the TV off. There's far too much hate in the world to waste your time, the time that you have left being entertained by it. It will only make you angry and it's just not worth it. I promise, I said. I promise all of these things to you. I will miss you so much, Annalise. You're my rock, my safe place. You've loved me, you've supported me, and you've challenged me to be the best version of me that I could ever be. Her smile faded and she closed her eyes. Anna, baby, please. She turned to me again and said, there's not much time, my love. You must live while you're alive. You are my everything, and I will always love you. Kiss me one more time, Toby, please. My eyes glossed over with tears. I leaned over and touched my lips to hers, ever so gently on the corner of her mouth. I placed her hand back at her side and watched her as she closed her eyes again. Her arms and legs stiffened and her head arched backwards. The bandages and cast returned, just like her blackened eyes. The brainwave monitor became more active. The beeps became more frequent. The tension in her body faded as I held her hand. I felt my own hand being squeezed steadily, and I looked at her face. Her lips parted, and I watched them slowly form the words, I love you. Her hand went limp, and the monitors were flat. Alarms sounded from the machines, and the light flashed in the hallway. I pulled her hand to my lips and said, I love you too, Anna. I always will. Several nurses came into the room, including Amy. My knees weakened and I was supported by Amy on my left and a male nurse on my right as they guided me out of the room. I turned to look one last time as they closed the curtain behind them. Before it closed completely, I saw, just for a second, a man. He was wearing a dark winter coat and was wearing a baseball cap, crying at the head of Anna's bed. The next several hours of my memory were and still are as shattered as my heart. There are pieces all over the hospital that hold images of rooms that I can't recall, people that I've never met, and sounds that have completely faded. Of the five senses, only one was prominent, an overwhelming feeling of emptiness. My first vivid memory is when I was sitting in a small room and someone brought me a blue folder and a large white plastic drawstring bag to me, put their hand on my shoulder and respectfully said, I think that's it, Mr. Miller. I had been dismissed. That was it. There was nothing more for me at that hospital. I went into that place only 12 hours before, carrying the heaviest load I had ever carried up to that point. Fear, anxiety, confusion, and hope. Yes, hope. With the sun shining brightly, reflecting off the blanket of snow, my backpack was slung over my left shoulder. A large plastic drawstring bag nearly dragging the floor by my feet, and all I could think was the weight of the load that I was carrying out was 1,000 times heavier than the one that I walked in with. Not on my shoulder or in my hands, but in my heart. The walk out to my truck felt like the longest I had ever taken. I threw my backpack, the folder, and the drawstring bag in my back seat and closed the door. I turned around to look at the emergency room entrance with my mind as empty as my chest. I felt the cool air on my face and closed my eyes for a moment. I swayed from left to right with the breeze, took a deep breath, and got in the truck. I slowly drove along the winding roads to exit the hospital grounds and took a right onto 82nd Street. As I approached Sargent Road, the light turned yellow, then red. I stared at the broken guardrail until I heard a horn from behind me. I looked up and inched forward through the already green light. When I arrived home, I pulled into the garage and pushed the button to close the door before ever getting out of the vehicle. I don't know how long I sat there, numb, before getting out and gathering my backpack in the plastic drawstring bag and walked into the house through the garage entrance. I reached the end of the hallway, went straight across into the kitchen, and set both bags down by the floor by the corner cabinet. I looked out of the kitchen into the living room through the cutouts in the walls. I looked around, moving only my eyes at the fireplace, the mantel, the candles, the cabinets, then the coffee table with the fondue pot and wilted fruit tray. I made a promise to Anna that I would live my life. But how? How could I go on? How could I wake up in the morning, mow the lawn, buy groceries, cook meals, go out to eat, hang out with friends, watch movies, and sleep at night? How could I ever live my life alone? Okay. We're going to stop there. One last recording. So I'm going to stop. If you're watching, I have to cut this off. So they're all about 30 minutes each. And we'll pick up with chapter 4, and that will be it until you get a chance to read it yourself. So hope you join me again. Thanks.